Our parents didn't have sex. I mean, physically it kind of existed, but in the information space it didn't. Let me explain in more detail. Welcome to the Ukrainian Eyes on America channel. I'm Mary, a Ukrainian, and in this video you'll discover many surprising facts about the real sexual life in Ukraine throughout different periods in our history. Let's get started. During the Soviet era, it was forbidden to show advertisements on television that mentioned sex, as well as films with bedroom scenes, let alone pornography. As was often said in Soviet programs, there is no sex in the USSR. They didn't even understand what it was. The word sex was associated with infidelity, something extramarital, while a husband and wife could only engage in making love. At that time, good food, a beautiful home interior, long hair, women's makeup, and interest in banned literature, art, and so on were considered signs of the resurgence of capitalism and were harshly repressed. True communists were expected to live poorly, both physically and spiritually, leading a dull life. This was to ensure they would not be distracted from the great goal of building communism, and sex, which undermined the communist individual and nurtured healthy selfishness within them, was naturally one of the important enemies of socialism. As a result, our grandparents didn't engage in sex, but rather made love with the purpose of procreation. At least that was the official belief. In the 1980s, when Soviet power had weakened, chattel traders emerged, a kind of smugglers who engaged in small-scale illegal trade, bringing vinyl records and tapes with banned Western music and films into the USSR. This is how our parents in their youth started learning about sex from Hollywood movies. My generation, those born after the collapse of the USSR in 1991, really studied everything through films, magazines, and a bit of the internet. The topic of sex could be discussed with very close friends, but at home and in school it remained a taboo subject. I once asked my grandmother, "Did you ever talk to anyone about sex when you were young?" She immediately blushed and said, "What are you talking about? That was not acceptable." In those days, many believed that sex was only permissible after marriage. Nowadays, views have changed, and premarital sex is not as strongly condemned. According to a 2019 survey, 63% of Ukrainians believe that sexual relations before marriage are normal, but only 5% of Ukrainians consider sex on the first date acceptable. I think Ukrainians are currently in a transitional period where much more is allowed, but admitting to it is still off limits. People might judge you. Now let me tell you about strange stereotype that half of Ukrainians still believe in. Few people discuss sex with their partners. According to recent surveys, this situation has already tipped the scales in the other direction. But not all Ukrainians have realized this yet. Specifically, 60% of respondents feel no discomfort or shame when talking about sex with their spouse or regular sexual partner. And only 6% are very embarrassed. 35% feel no shame at all when talking about sex with friends or acquaintances, while 14% are very embarrassed. 21% reported that they don't feel ashamed when talking about sex with strangers. At the same time, almost a third feel very embarrassed. The younger generation and men are less likely to feel discomfort when talking about sex. So sexual education and Western culture have significantly influenced Ukrainian society in terms of sexual development. Let's look at the next, equally interesting point. A partner should be one. Most Ukrainians believe that open relationships and polygamy are absolutely wrong, while in America 67% consider non-monogamy acceptable with mutual consent. For many Ukrainians, if you have more than one partner, you're seen as broken. They will say, "What's wrong with you? Why do you need this?" I personally had an experience meeting a couple who were married and at the same time had open sexual relationships with other other people. To say I was shocked when I learned about this is an understatement. Don't get me wrong, if people want to live that way, it's their business and their right. But I just couldn't imagine it was possible that a husband could be okay with his wife to having sex with other men, and the wife could be okay with her husband's adventures. I'm curious, what do people in the US think about it? Write your thoughts in the comments. I would love to read your opinion. Did you know that if a guy in Ukraine asks a girl if she wants to have sex, he might also be considered strange? Why ask unnecessary questions? This puts the girl in an awkward position. For many Ukrainian women, it's much easier when everything happens naturally, intuitively. By verbally agreeing to sex, a Ukrainian girl tends to feel like she is presenting herself in a more available light. And the reason for this is cultural norms, social pressure, and upbringing. Interesting fact, in 2019, a law on sexual consent was introduced in Ukraine, implying that for the process not to be considered rape legally, voluntary consent from both parties is required. Many Ukrainians began to mock this law, saying, now you have to sign a document of voluntary consent with your partner before sex? As a result, this law was indeed recognized as underdeveloped, but its wording has not yet been changed, and each case is considered separately. By the way, in our culture, it's also not customary to propose dating or entering into a relationship. A relationship is considered active after a mutual kiss. If no one, like in American movies, says, this was a mistake after this, then everything is okay and now you're a couple. In recent years, various courses and educational programs on relationships and sexual life have gained popularity in Ukraine, and they are popular with both men and women. Through the latter show much more interest. The variety of topics is vast, from how to win over the desired man and rules of conduct on dates, to courses on sexual literacy. That's how many views videos on YouTube on sex and relationships are getting. As they say, progress doesn't stand still. Such interest is understandable. The topic of sex has been taboo in our society for many centuries, and it's not just the USSR to blame for this. The adoption of Christianity back in 1988 significantly influenced sexual norms and practices. For those unaware, it was in this year that the Kiev Prince Yaroslav the Wise conducted the Christianization of Rus, and Orthodoxy became the main religion in the region, displacing pagan beliefs. The Church imposed strict restrictions on sexual life, promoting chastity and abstinence. For over 1000 years, sex in Ukraine was a dirty topic, and only in 1991 were many of these restrictions significantly weakened. It's like when a child is forbidding something for many years and then suddenly it's allowed. It becomes interesting. What was so secretive about it that it was forbidden for so long? In the pagan beliefs in the Slavs who lived in the territory of Ukraine, sexuality was not condemned but rather revered as a natural part of life. Unfortunately, due to the lack of written records, we know very little about rituals and sexual practices of those times. The data that has survived shows that the Slavs closely associated sex with fertility. Sex was seen not only as a way of procreation, but also as a sacred act contributing to the community's well-being, the harvest and the health of livestock. One strange custom has survived to this day, the meaning of which not all Ukrainians even know. Listen carefully to me now and think about my words. There is a Christian holiday called Easter. On this day, the resurrection of Jesus Christ is celebrated on the first Sunday after the spring full moon. Therefore, the exact date of the holiday can vary from April 4 to May 8. In countries where Orthodox Christianity is practiced, it's customary to bake Easter cakes, dye eggs, and go to church church early in the morning so that the priest can bless them. Attention! 2 questions. If Jesus was resurrected only once, why do we celebrate this event every year on a different date? After all, every event has a specific date. Why do Orthodox Christians bake Easter cakes and dye eggs? According to a certain legend, among the Slavic tribes before the Christianization of Rus, the greatest holiday was the holiday of the spring equinox. This holiday was associated with the awakening of nature after winter. People believed that on this day warmth and light prevailed and a new life cycle began. To determine exactly when this holiday would come, the Slavs simply looked at the sun. When the day became as long as the night, they understood that it was time to celebrate. Thus, the holiday was celebrated on different calendar days. On this day, rituals were often accompanied by symbolic acts of copulation to ensure a good harvest. And the main symbol of the rebirth of life was the male sexual organ, representing the beginning of new life. When the Christian church came, the holiday was first banned, but people still continued their traditions. As a result, the holiday was replaced and assimilated under Christian customs, transforming it into Easter. Now Easter is a Christian holiday, but it still contains elements that came from pagan beliefs. For example, the custom of baking Easter cakes and dyeing eggs, which suspiciously remind us of something, and celebrating the holiday on different calendar days. What do you think about this legend? Is there a grain of truth in this story, or is it just a beautiful myth? Share your thoughts in the comments.